Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over the different surface sounds that the tyres are going to be interacting with. So for instance, the asphalt, the loose gravel, the apex sounds, and also the grass. Here's what it's going to sound like. Before I show you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my little mixing area here, and I'm going to go to my surface audio, and I'm going to actually put the volume up on that, just so it's very easy for you to hear it when we do our example. Okay, so everything's a little bit too loud now for the surface, but it'll give you an idea of essentially what those sounds are going to sound like and how they're going to work. So as I take off, the first thing you're going to hear is the sound of asphalt scrubbing against the tyres, so like little small stones essentially. So you can hear that. If I go over to this loose gravel, you'll hear loose gravel emit from the tyres. Now if I drive fast on asphalt, you'll start to hear the low-pitched rumble of essentially the road, sort of like that road hum sound that you'll get like if you're on the motorway, for instance. So you can hear it start to come in there. If I drive on the grass, you'll hear grass. If I hit this apex, you'll hear the apex. Now the next thing we need to do to get ready to build our Metasound on our event graph is essentially tell Unreal Engine what surfaces actually exist in our level. So to do that, what you do is you go to Edit at the top, go to Project Settings, and then from here you want to look for the physics area here. And then once you found the physics area, scroll down, and there is a little area where you can literally type in what the physical surfaces are. So you can see here on surface type 1, I've said this is asphalt. Surface type 2 is grass, then there's gravel, and then there's apex standard, just in case I wanted different apex sounds. You might want like a rough apex or a softer apex, and you may want different sounds for them, depending on sort of how detailed you want to be with your game. So that's the first thing you need to do. You need to tell Unreal Engine what all the different physical surfaces are in your level, essentially. The next thing you need to create is something called a physical material. So you can see I've got 4 here. I've got apex, asphalt, grass, and gravel. If you want to create one, it's very simple. Just right click here and type in physical, and you can see here physical material. If you click that, it will take you through a little screen, and then you can go and create one of these. If I open one of these up, you can see you've got a bunch of things that you can say what this surface is. So for instance, you've got something called a friction multiplier. This is really useful for the physics of a racing game in particular, because you can tell if a surface is slippy. So let's say for instance you have ice in one of your level. You might set this to like 0.4 and it'll be very slippy and the car will be sliding around a lot more. Since it's asphalt, I'm going to set mine to 1. The most important thing for us right now is the surface type. If I hit this drop down menu here, you'll see all of the options are here, what we wrote in on the project settings and the physics panel. So essentially this is where we can attribute to this physical material what the surface type is, and later on that's going to be really helpful when we're trying to trigger the different surface sounds. Now the next thing you're going to need to know is how to attribute the physical materials to these 3 different elements. So we need to know how to do it for materials, for landscapes, and for meshes. So to give an example, we're using a spline to spawn the road mesh in a certain way so that essentially we have a road. But it is a mesh, and we need to be able to say that this mesh has a physical material, and the physical material it has is asphalt. It's the same for landscapes. So say for instance you drive off the road and you go on the landscape. Well, we want to be able to say this physical material is grass. But let's say we have painted onto that landscape a different material. Well, in that case, we want to be able to say that this physical material is something else. Say for instance it's loose gravel. So hopefully that all makes sense. I'm going to show you how we do that now. So here we are inside of our level. If I just remove myself so that you can see the full screen, I'll go over to our landscape here and I'll select it. Once it's selected, you can see it has a default physical material of PM underscore grass. That's the physical material we created just before. If I go to the landscape material and on the grass material instance, so this is a material instance, if I open that up, you can see on the physical material, this is also set to PM underscore grass. You can also do it on normal material. So if I open up the normal material, you see physical material grass is over here. Now, the next thing you'll need to know is how to do it for meshes. Now, this is where I had a lot of struggling to do to figure out what was going wrong. What I was doing was I was driving on the road and what was being reported was the default material and it wasn't triggering the correct sound. So I'm going to show you how to do that. If you select this, you'll see you can't actually find anything where you can say, oh, that's what this physical material is, because this is actually a spline and this is where I was struggling a lot. So what you have to do is you have to go and find the mesh that this spline is actually generating essentially. So you can see I've already got mine typed in here, track. If I open up the mesh here, you can see that this is it. And if I show you this, you can see on this material here, material asphalt instance, if I open it up, the physical material is set to asphalt. If I then open up the parent class of that, the physical material is also set to asphalt here, like it was with the landscape. However, that's not enough with meshes. With meshes, you need to tell it specifically what the mesh itself is. So if I scroll down here, and this is something that took me actually hours to find, hopefully I've saved you a lot of heartache. If you look on the collision area here, and you look on the simple collision physical material, sorry, you can see that's set to physical material asphalt. So it's sort of hidden away there. Once you find it, it's like, yes, I know what to do now. So that's how you do it for meshes. It was an absolute pain in the neck for me to find that. So hopefully I've saved you a good few hours of headaches there. So that's it. That's how you do it for those three different elements. So you now know how to do it for materials, for meshes, and what was the other one? For landscapes as well. So there you go, you know how to do that all now, and we can get to the next section. Right, so the next thing we need to do is a little file roll call before we get into the actual Metasound that we're going to create. So what I have is 4 different asphalt scrub sounds. So this is the sound of essentially the sole of a shoe rubbing against some hard concrete. And as you rub it against the concrete, it sort of chips away at like little bits of concrete, and you get that nice sort of scrubby concrete sound, but it kind of lends itself to like when a car sets off and you have like little stones that the tires are running over. So that's kind of the sound that we get here. I'll play that for you now. Okay, so it's that kind of sound. The next thing we have is surface noise grass, which sounds a little bit like this. So that's the sound of grass and dried leaves essentially being tossed in front of a microphone. What you also have is the surface noise gravel, which is essentially small, very small stones and rocks, kind of like sand and debris. And I'm just kind of pouring that slowly onto a surface and picking up the sound of that with a microphone. So that's what that sounds like. We also have surface noise road hum. So that's kind of like that low pitched hum you would expect, for instance, if you're driving on a motorway. So that kind of sounds almost a little bit like the wind sound that we have, except it's much more lower pitched. And I think that sound in particular lends itself to more of an interior sound. So if you're inside the vehicle, I think if you're outside the vehicle, you might want to turn the volume of that down a little bit. Then we also have an apex rumble sound, which is actually an extremely short sound. And the way this one is going to work is it's going to work by repeating it very, very quickly. And we're going to change how quickly we're repeating it to make the pitch go up and down. So if we're driving on an apex very, very quick, it's going to play that sound faster, and therefore the pitch is going to go up. If we're driving on the apex slowly, it's going to play it slower, and therefore the pitch is going to be lower. So we're going to get that nice sort of dynamic sound from the apexes there. Now, if you don't have these sounds and you don't want to go and make them, I do suggest that you do go and make them, because it is a lot of fun, to be honest. But if you don't have them and you don't have the time to make them, I'll show you where you can get them. So on my website at sotasound.co.uk, you have two options. You have the light version where you can get all the sounds for free. I say all the sounds, you are missing a fair few, but it's enough to get you through the series. And then on the Racing Game Sound Design Full, which is £10, you get every single sound that I am using in this session. I have noticed over the past few months, some people have actually been buying this, so I want to say a special thank you to you guys in particular. That really does mean a lot to me, so thank you very much. Now finally, we can go through the Metasounds. Now, one thing you may not have realised is that each tyre, all four of them, have their own Metasound, and they're going to be emitting their own unique sound based on what they're driving on. So, what we have here is Metasound Sound Effects Surface Audio BL for back left. Exactly the same, Metasound Sound Effects Surface Audio BR for back right. Then FL for front left and FR for front right. If I go and open up my sedan pawn here, you can see inside of the wheels, there are little speakers, and those speakers represent the Metasound that are loaded into those specific areas on the vehicle. So each of these wheels are going to be emitting their own unique sound based on what they're driving on. So this is really cool. So say for instance, you are doing a right hand turn and you get your right front tyre to hit an apex. Then what's going to happen is this Metasound here is going to be oscillating that apex sound, but the left front tyre will be oscillating the asphalt sound. The back left tyre will be oscillating the asphalt sound, and the back right tyre, let's say for instance this tyre dips its wheel into some loose gravel, well this tyre will be emitting its loose gravel sound. So all four of them are independent from each other and will be emitting their own unique sound. So as a result, we have four different Metasounds which are loaded up into each of those tyres. What I'm going to show you is one Metasound, and then I'll show you the very small differences that are between these four. Because what we're going to do is we're going to create this one, and then once you've created that one, you can then duplicate it 3 times and then make some minor adjustments to make sure that what you're getting is a unique sound across all 4 tyres. So let's open up the front left and I'll show you how we created it. So here is the Metasound. We have 4 different areas. We have the road hum loop area. We have the asphalt scrub area, which is only played when the car first sets off. So when the car first sets off, we say, okay, we want a little bit of those small stones and rocks underneath the tyres, and we want to hear that. And only if we're on asphalt. Then down here we have the grass surface logic, which is essentially exactly the same as the road hum logic. They're both loops. So they're essentially using this sort of logic here, but the name and conventions on these graph inputs are a little bit different. So the grass surface audio is very similar. Same with the gravel surface audio, again, very similar. And then we have something a little bit different going on with the Apex Rumble due to the functionality of it. This is the really cool thing about Metasounds. You can have all of those sounds encompassed inside of a single Metasound, and essentially using these, you can get them to work very, very differently. So the Apex Rumble sound is working completely differently to the grass and gravel and road hum loops, whereas the asphalt scrub is again working differently. So that's the beauty of Metasounds and why they're really cool. And one of the reasons why sort of third-party software is kind of not as much needed now. You still do need it, don't get me wrong, but this is one of the main strengths of Metasounds. So what we're then going into next is a stereo mixer, which is bringing all those together. Then we have obviously the Apex Rumble going off into this mono mixer. We've got a little area here for the master gain and then out mono, and then we've got some logic here for telling this sound when essentially it's finished, essentially. So let's go over starting from the road hum. Okay, so starting on the road hum, we have 2 trigger inputs, one to say play and one to say stop. These are being fed into the play of our wave player and the input of this trigger delay, which then goes into the stop. One thing to take note of is that the play is also being used to reset this trigger delay. We've went through this a few times in previous episodes. I'm not going to keep hashing out the same thing, the same reasons why we do this. But basically that's just important so that we don't accidentally stop this sound when we want to play it. Now the delay time is going into a float to time conversion, and then we have a custom graph input, which is a float graph input called CF_time, which stands for crossfade time, and that is set to 50 milliseconds. Then from here, we are taking the out left and out right of our wave player. I should say this, with it being the Road hum, in this wave player, we have loaded in the surface noise _ road hum, which is what I showed you earlier on. Then on the out left and out right is going out to this stereo mixer. Now following this gain up, I'll show you the logic we have here. So we'll start up here. So road hum _ gain balance, this is a float graph input that I've created, and this is just to control the overall volume of essentially this wave player. Then we're going into a multiplier and an interp 2. And you can see we are feeding off the interp time off both of these into 2 float to time converters, and then we've got the same graph input we had over here. So CF time, 50 milliseconds, and that is being fed into the interp 2. Now for loop gain, which is another graph input, this is a little bit different. So we've done crossfades before, where we crossfade between different sounds. What loop gain is, because it's a wheel, I want to be able to influence the volume of the surface underneath that wheel based on how fast the car is traveling. So the faster the car is traveling, the more this loop gain is going to go up. Whereas the slower this car is traveling, the more this loop gain is going to go down, and eventually it will be 0 when the car is stationary. So that's essentially what loop gain is, and it's very important for these loop type of instances of the sound, essentially. Then we do actually have our crossfade logic down here. So road hum _ fade, that's the element that's going to be getting switched from 1 to 0, 0 to 1, to basically switch the volume of that sound on and off. So this is a slightly more complicated version of what we're used to, but it all works perfectly fine. And all that is going down into the gain section. I'm going to come into this asphalt section in just a minute, but while we've got the logic of this fresh in our minds, I want to skip past this just for a moment and go to the grass surface. So this is exactly the same. The only difference is some of the naming convention is a bit different. So all of this, in terms of how it works logically, is working exactly the same. It's just, it's called grass _ gain. We still have a loop gain, so that's copy and pasted across from here. We still have things like the interp 2s and the 2 multipliers. The thing you want to watch out for is the naming convention of things like this. So grass _ gain, grass _ fade. So it would be possible to just sort of copy and paste most of this, but then look out for these little bits which change their naming convention. So you can see these both change their naming convention. You can see that these both change their naming convention. So if I come down here, you can see it's grass play and grass stop, and you can see it's grass _ gain and grass _ fade, whereas these are the same. The crossfade time is the same, so most of it is copy and pastable, apart from this and this. And of course the wave player itself needs to have the grass sound loaded in, not the asphalt rumble sound. So you can see there it says surface noise _ grass. So that's what this wave player is doing. And it's exactly the same for the gravel. So you can see this is gravel _ play and stop, and it's gravel gain and gravel fade, and then the rest of it is copy and pasted across. So it's exactly the same logic because it's our loop sounds. So hopefully that's all okay and you can go away and easily make these. The next thing we need to go over is the asphalt scrub. Now for the asphalt scrub section, what we have are 4 wave players, and loaded into these 4 wave players are the 4 different asphalt scrub sounds that come with the the sound pack that I've created, or you can create your own 4 unique sounds there. Now to trigger the play, we're using custom trigger inputs. So you can see Asphalt Scrub 1 play, 2 play, 3 play and 4 play. And each of those are going into the plays of each wave player. And then the same again for all 4 of these, we're going into one trigger delay here, which is set to 0.01, so a very short trigger delay. And then that's going into another trigger delay, which is set to 5 seconds. And then we're also feeding this into the reset of this trigger delay. There is a reason why I've done that, and I will get to that later. So exactly the same here, here and here. Now if you follow all of these pink lines, I'll select this top pink line here. So you can see the in 1 is going all the way into here and in 1 right. And then if I go to the bottom, you can see in right is going to in 4 are here. So we're basically bringing all of these in to our stereo mixer, and then we're processing the gains of all 4 of those sounds together, which is what this is doing. You can see it's branching out to the 4 different areas where those Asphalt Scrub sounds are feeding into the stereo mixer. So you see here on this custom graph input, it's a float graph input. It's called Asphalt Scrub _ gain. So that's a simple control which allows us to control the gain of that Asphalt Scrub sound. That's going into a multiplier. And then we have Asphalt Fade, which is going between 1 and 0, so that we can turn that sound on and off using an interp 2, which is set to 2 seconds. So over the course of 2 seconds, it's going to be averaging out this value. So that is the Asphalt Scrub sound. Next thing we're going to go over is the Apex sound. Now for the Apex Rumble sound, we have a very similar, well, exactly the same configuration here. We have Apex Play, Apex Stop as trigger inputs, and we have that configuration where we're going into the trigger delay, and we're also feeding into the play here, the stop here, and we're also feeding into the reset to stop any unwanted stops on this wave player. Then again, crossfade time into the float to time conversion, and then we're into the wave player. And the wave player has loaded in the Apex Rumble sound. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that this is a loop, so loop is checked, and you'll notice in all of these, loop is checked, apart from the Asphalt Scrub sound, which is kind of like a one-off when the car sets off. So that's not set to a loop, that's just a one-off sound which we trigger, and then the road hum is set to a loop. So I just wanted to mention that before we continue. Now this is where the Apex Rumble sound is different from the rest, because it needs to pitch shift up and down based on how fast the car is driving over the actual rumble strip of the Apex. So on the out left and out right, we're going into 2 delay pitch shift nodes, and then for the pitch shift we're using a custom float graph input called Apex PS, so Apex pitch shift essentially. So this is going to be going up and down based on how fast or slow we're driving. So if we're driving slower, we may want to pitch shift it down. If we're driving faster, we may want to pitch shift it up, and we'll be doing that inside of the event graph of the player controlled blueprints. So once we've done that, we're then going into, I'll cover this in just a moment. We're then going into a plus, which is bringing together the left side and the right side channel and essentially converting it to mono. I'll go over why we do that in just a minute. Now this, I believe, is all exactly the same stuff. So it's the same as this really, except we're changing the name of these. So you can see these are changed. It's Apex Rumble Gain, Apex Fade. And then we have the same sort of loop gain and crossfade time, which has been copy and pasted across into the float to time conversions, the 2 interp 2s, and then the multipliers. So this is exactly the same as this. It's just you gotta watch out for the naming convention here. And also we have this added in section here where we're controlling the pitch shift of this wave player. Now for mono, why are we switching it to mono? If I come up here, what you'll notice is we're going from a stereo mixer into a mono mixer. So if I go out here, this Metasound, even though we're dealing with stereo sounds with these wave players, we're coming out into just the out left onto this mono mixer. The reason we're doing that is because we're going to copy and paste, well, we're going to duplicate this Metasound, and we're going to have like the front left tyre and the front right tyre. So one change you'll notice on the front right tyre's Metasound is that it won't be coming out of the out left. It's a simple case of dragging this wire over to the out right. And then that Metasound basically works for the front right tyre with a few additional tweaks. So that's essentially why we've done it this way, because it's going to make it super easy to just duplicate the sound across and use it for the other tyre, essentially. So this is why we're converting it to mono here. Now, coming out of Mono Mixer 2, we're going into a multiply audio by float node. We're using decibels to linear gain conversion, so that essentially we have a nice little master gain fader here where we can control the overall volume of the Metasound. Then coming out of this audio pin here, we're going out to the output mono, and we're ready to attach this Metasound to the front left tyre of our car, and then go into the event graph and do all the other stuff. Now, this little bit of logic here, we have a simple stop, so when we click stop, it's going to go into a trigger delay, and we have a clear stop, which is essentially if we want the Metasound to play again, we want to essentially stop this trigger delay from carrying out that signal to the unfinished, which will essentially stop the Metasound. So we're trying to avoid it prematurely stopping, essentially. So that's the little bit of logic we have here. Now, what I do want to do is show you the three other Metasounds for the front right tyre, the back left tyre, and the back right tyre, and essentially highlight some of the differences so that when you duplicate these across, you can essentially make those little tweaks yourself and you'll know what you need to do. Okay, so the first thing you're going to have to do is duplicate that Metasound you've just created. So you can see here I've got surface audio front left for a Metasound, but I also have FR for front right, BL for back left, and BR for back right. And those are here, so you can see I've got all these Metasounds, and if I zoom out, what I've done is I've actually highlighted the differences between them. So you can see I've actually highlighted it with comments what the differences are. So this is our original Metasound we just created. I've added a little comment here, which is basically saying not being used. So these are not actually being used, but you've duplicated across to our front right. So this is from the front left Metasound. Now we're on the front right Metasound, where these ones are not being used. So these asphalt scrub sounds 1 and 2 are not being used, but these ones are. So if you wanted to, you could get rid of these, but I wouldn't advise it. I would just say when we get to the event graph, it'll just be the way we communicate with this Metasound will just mean that these never actually get triggered. So it's like they're not there in the first place. The other thing that's changed is obviously what I mentioned before. Instead of going out the left, we're coming out of the right. And that is the major difference between the front left, which is the original one we created, and the front right. So those are the two major differences, this one being the most important to make sure that you do. Now, if I go back to the front left, now I'm going to compare that with the back left Metasound. So the front left Metasound, here we are, and the back left Metasound, what you'll notice is none of the asphalt scrub sounds are being used. So the asphalt scrub sounds are only being triggered on the front left tyre and the front right tyre. So that's why this is all in red. It's basically saying none of that's actually being used. We're never actually going to be triggering those Metasounds when we get to the event graph. The other thing is stop time has changed. So because this is using the exact same surface noise of the Rodon, what will happen is if you don't change the stop time here, you can see that says 4.5 seconds. What will happen is it will just be the exact same sound as the front left tyre, and it'll just sort of mix together. So you can see on the front left tyre, the start time is 0. So it's starting that sound, that loop, at the start of the audio, where on this one, we're starting it in 4.5 seconds in. So that's like halfway through the loop. So that's important to make sure that the sounds that you're triggering are actually different and they're not the same. So that's the main thing you need to check. So For the road hum sound, go and change that wave player to 4.5 seconds on the start time. We do the same on the grass. We change the start time to 9 seconds. And the start time on this one, the gravel, is 11.5. And you don't have to do anything with the apex rumble, because essentially the tyres are going to be hitting the apex rumble at different times, which means the wave player will be triggered at slightly different times anyway. And because it's a back left one, we're going out the left side, so left channel is used. So that's the major difference between the original one we created and this one. Now we're going to compare the original one we created with the back right. The back right is essentially exactly the same as the back left. So we've got all the same start time put in there. So you can see 9 seconds on the grass, 11.5 seconds on the gravel. The major difference with the back right, you see here, 9 seconds on the grass, 11.5 seconds on the gravel. The major difference is that now we're taking the right channel. So it would be easier just to duplicate the back left over onto the back right and then take this wire here and just move it over to the output right. And essentially that is your 4 independent Metasounds, which will be sounding completely unique sounds for each of these wheels. And then we will be ready for the next episode, where we'll be basically communicating with those 4 Metasounds to get the correct sounds from each of those tyres. So thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you next time.